need a glass of water? No? You good? Okay.
Thank you.
All set?
Tell me when it's 11 o'clock, will you, Tom?
You got 2 minutes.
Yeah, you got to fix them up. Well, I'm going to start a little early because we've only got a few minutes to be here. I've been told by the Brubaker family that this whole event's going to be 45 minutes, including the Army coming in, and they're going to do a flag ceremony and play taps at the end. So, my name is John Depew, and I'm not a preacher. I am a elder of the church, but Stanley Brubaker asked me years ago if I would do a service. And so he wrote, and I said I would, but I thought I was going to go before he was. But it didn't happen that way, unfortunately. So here I am. I'd like to welcome everybody on behalf of the Brubaker family, Christy, Rod, Scott, Pete. We met Thursday, I believe it was, and we went over some of the details. If anybody has a U-Haul truck or a big trailer that would like to move some of Stan and Joe's furniture, I'm sure they'd appreciate it, okay? That's just if. You don't need to rent one, but if you have a truck, that would be great. Anyhow, welcome. We're here to celebrate the life of Stan Brubaker, who we all knew, some of us very well. Bear with me. We're going to get the program started. I got a couple scripture readings that I'm going to read at the beginning. Shelley and Blake Wilson are going to play a couple hymns. For those that didn't know or don't know, we do a Good News in the Park at Old Settlers Park every summer. We've been doing it for 10 years. And Shelley and Blake have always provided the music. And Stan was always a part of that. He was always the first one that came to help Shelley with her stool or me with my coffee, because he wouldn't come unless I was there with coffee. But Shelley and Blake very graciously offered to provide the music today. So they're going to do what we do at the park in the summertime. And by the way, you're all invited. It's a non-denominational. I'm looking at Mrs. Lampkin there. It's a time to listen for good news about Jesus Christ. And we've been doing it for how long, Jerry?
10 years.
10 years.
Yep.
So and I think the Brubaker family, Scott and Pete and Christy and Rod, would like to do a more get-together, an informal get-together in the park this summer at Old Settlers Park, because there's a lot of folks that knew Stanley that can't make it here today because they're down south where it's warm. So we're going to do a little, just a short get-together, maybe some sandwiches, just good times to share times with Stan or the family. Stories about Stan, as long as they're appropriate. I don't know if I'll be there or not, because most of my stories are maybe not appropriate, or as appropriate as they should be.
Yeah, you probably took that out, right?
That's Rodney's phone, I think. Anyhow, So there'll be no luncheon today, but you're all invited to come to Old Settlers Park sometime. A date to be decided later, but we're going to have a little gathering at the Old Settlers Park. So anyhow, welcome. My first reading is from Matthew 17. Consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word of our Jesus Christ. Then Matthew 11:28 and 30. Come to me, all you that are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest. You will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I think that hearing the word, knowing Jesus Christ, is a tribute to Stan and what he heard at the park. I'll talk a little bit more about our conversations that we've had in our travels, but Stan became close to Jesus. For those that maybe knew Stan before, he accepted Christ. And for that, we are grateful. So with that, I'm going to have Shelley and Blake do Amazing Grace.
Please sing along. Amazing grace, how sweet that sound, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, told and served, I have already come. 'Twas grace that brought me this far, and grace will lead me home. And we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun. We know that sin to sing the praise, and when we first begun. Amazing grace, oh how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see.
Thanks, Shelley. Thanks, Blake. That was one of Stanley's requests to have that song sung at his funeral, so we're glad we could do it. On behalf of Stanley, he took about 3 years to type his obituary. And I got all 10 pages of it, but I crossed a lot of it off, okay? If, in fact, you want to read the whole thing, I have the full copy in front of me, It probably might put you to sleep, but you'll probably find, here's the original obituary that Stanley had. 10 pages, talks about everything in his life. So I said, no, I think I'll put everybody to sleep if I read all 10 pages. So I challenged myself and I crossed a lot of it off. I probably could have put it on one page, but Stanley would not appreciate what I did here. I want you to know that. So, here we go. Part of it. Stan Rex Brubaker, 95 years old, Glen Haven, also called the mayor of Glen Haven, by the way. Died March 6th of 2023. And God loved Christy Brubaker because she was with her dad from the moment he went to the hospital until he passed away. And in my heart, I'm glad she was there. She's a saint. So Christy put up a lot. I talked to her on the phone. In fact, I talked to Stan a couple times on Sunday, and the message I got from Christy is, yeah, he's doing good because he's flirting with all the nurses that come in the hospital. And I thought to myself, well, he's going to be okay. Until Sunday night, and then things kind of went downhill. But anyhow, he was recovering from a fall that the Glen Lake Fire Department assisted him in. The first call he made was to me after he crawled 2 hours to get in his house because he had broken his pelvic bones. And I wasn't home, of course. I was down in North Carolina with my wife Pam, visiting our daughter and son-in-law. So the second call was to the fire department, and Steve and his crew came and took Stan to the hospital. So we're very grateful that you guys were available to come. Thank you. Stan left this to catch up with his wife, Joanne Dreyer. She was a childhood friend of 79 years and a wife of 63 years. She died at the Grand Traverse Pavilion on May 4th, 2016. After a stroke, she was 85. Stan was born October 7th, 1927 in Cleveland, Ohio, the only son of Rex and Eva Brubaker. When Stan was 6 months old, the family moved via train to Detroit. The family first lived in southeast Detroit. During the third grade, he met Joe when his family attended the Central Methodist at Woodward in North Grand Circus Park Church. Stan was 9 and Joe was 6 when they first met. Stan's mom and dad were both brought up on a farm. So Stan, from the age of 10 to 17, spent several weeks each summer in the farm in New York where his mom grew up. And I took out all the things about the chickens and the cows and all the things that he did and all the things he learned, but that was important to him. After intermediate school, his freshman high school year, he went to Cass Tech. Moved to northeast Detroit, 2 miles from where Joe lived. I wonder why that happened, but anyhow. And he graduated from Redford High School, 6 miles at 6 Mile Road in Grand River. So Stan's dad bought him a used, not new, it was wartime, a 1941 Plymouth business coupe. Stan graduated from Redford High School in 1945, and upon turning 18, he received a notice to report for induction into the Army at Fort Sheridan, north of Chicago. There he was drafted into the Army, with the Army people saying, hey, they had no idea when Congress was going to decide the duration it was officially over. This was after the Germans surrendered. Stan's mother and Joe and her mother, in parentheses, after careful planning of the mothers, question mark, left Detroit in an 8-passenger 1946 DeSoto, which some of you may remember as a Chrysler product. The automotive inventory car, Stan driving for the trip to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Several Special Service Regiment of Patton's Third Army is where Stan was sent into France and Germany. The job was to restore buildings and war destruction, basic commerce infrastructure. Upon arriving home and discharge in 1947, Stan's mom and dad presented him with a new 1947 Black Mercury convertible. And he has big letters, wow. He first went down to see Joe, imagine that. Then returned to working for his dad's business in Detroit. Stan enrolled at the University of Indiana in Bloomington in business. Surprisingly, Joe was there at the University of Indiana in School of Music, and she majored in piano. Stan was definitely not musical. He was. Is that true?
Yes.
Capital letters, not. He was in business school and at the same campus. Stan proposed finally during 1952, his senior year. There was some conflict with Joe's dad about getting married because he needed her as a tax deduction until the end of the year. So Stan was married on January 2nd in Detroit, back at Central Methodist Church. This was in 1953. Stan's dad had two main businesses, automotive bin service, steel shoving for parts. Main office in Detroit was a home of auto manufacturing, ABS branch in Indianapolis, Louisville, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, and Cleveland. And he also had automotive inventory and appraisal company, physically doing inventory services for the auto dealers' parts on an annual basis or upon a dealer's change of ownership. Stan worked for AIA during his high school and summers when he wasn't on the farm, and Joe and Stan lived in Birmingham, raising the 4 children. Christy, Rod, Peter, Scott. The family began renting in Glen Haven a summer vacation cottage from John and Patty Stans in 1961 for 1 week, adding a week each to the following years until buying the cottage in 1964, then spending the entire summer there while improving and enlarging the cottage. The Anything Goes Glen Haven to Glen Arbor 4th of July Parade is an event forever in Stan's great pride. It started with Joe and Stan organizing their summer neighbors' kids on trikes and wagons, parading from Joe and Stan's cottage near Sleeping Bear Point Coast Guard Station to downtown Glen Haven. Marion Warnes also claims she was the first spectator. Credits for her living room window over the Warnes Glen Haven store and the gas pumps for the dune rides. In 1963, so many more Americans joined the show to show their gratitude and pride, en route expanded to go all the way from Glen Haven to Glen Arbor. Wow. All the Brubakers hope true Americans never stop showing their appreciation for America by continuing to join in this unscripted great parade. In 1972, Christy had just entered college, so Joe and the boys moved from Birmingham to Glen Haven to live year-round. The boys all graduated from Glen Lake High School, Rod in 1976, Pete in 1978, and Scott in 1979. Now, he gave me those dates, so if they're not right, you guys are going to have to correct that. Over those years, while Joe was busy again enlarging the cottage and starting her Glen Arbor business, Leland Interiors, Stan was cleaning and selling the Birmingham home to closing his Detroit business interests. In 1976, Stan was able to stay in Glen Haven. He moved his business, Skokie International. Stan's Glen Arbor building, the old post house, the building which long ago was the home of the Glen Arbor Post Office, now occupied by Joe's Leland Interior, which he started in 1973. Plus a one-bedroom rental apartment in the back was expanded to make room for Skokie International. Skokie moved to Glen Arbor through the first telex machine, which Pam and Dana can remember. It scared the living, when I worked for Stan at Skokie, it scared the living bejesus out of me because all of a sudden this noise would come out of his office and it sounded like a ticker tape coming from New York. And what it was Pam and Dana would go in there and there'd be a long strip of tape with a bunch of holes in it. And somehow they could figure out how to make that come out in print. But Pam and Dana did that for years. And Pam's comment to me was she was always afraid it was going to run out of ribbon in the middle of a transaction from Switzerland or wherever. But it didn't happen. Skokie International was the export and sales distributor company. Skokie was finally closed in early 2000s. Stan also appreciated the news from close friends, the Stanzas, the Depews, the Buckler, and many other Glen Arbor and Empire from the Glen Arbor and Empire area. There are many snowmobile trips, his several years as Glen Arbor Zoning and Planning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, his longtime informal association with the Glen Arbor Fire Department, his involvement with the design and building of the fire department's rescue boat, his 2 terms on the Michigan State Waterways Commission, appointed by Governor Milliken, and many motorhome trips with Joe and their dogs, mainly across northern U.S. and Canada. Stan and Joe loved living their lives and raising their children. It was wonderful in the wonderful, small, close-supported Glen Haven, Glen Arbor, Empire communities. True Americans. Stan also appreciated the housekeeping caregiver, Darla Yost, starting during Joe's first stroke and recovery period and continuing after Joe's passing and finally to Stan's death. Stan is survived by his children, Christy of Empire, her son, Christy's sons Josh and Dusty. Thank you, Dusty. Sorry. I got it down here someplace. I just don't remember where it is. It's in this mess. Where was I? Rod Brubaker of Traverse City. Peter, his wife Kathy, and his 2 sons are here, right? Scott and Melinda of Littleton, Colorado. Stan is sorry to leave it all behind, but now it's time to get back with Joe and give her much needed advice. In parentheses, fat chance, on creating great accommodations for the new arrivals in God's kingdom. To all you, God bless America. Goodbye. And see you later. That's the rendition that I did. If you want to look at the full 10 pages, you can check it out. But remembering Stan. I first met Stan in 1972, I believe, when he first came up here. And Pam and I were living in a trailer in Glen Haven. And Rod and Peter and Scott rode my school bus. I was a school bus driver, amongst other things. But I met Stan. I don't remember exactly where I met him, but I did meet him then. And the parade was always a big deal for Stan, as I mentioned. It was a huge event for Stanley and Joe. And in 1981, Stan drew me away from Empire Bank in Traverse City to go to work for him at Skokie International in Glen Arbor. First of all, I had no idea what Skokie International was. I figured it was something to do with something overseas. Come to find out, it was a business that Stanley had bought from Skokie, Illinois, moved it to Glen Arbor, and we were in the export business. We exported vehicles from Detroit, Ohio, to different areas in the Middle East, some to Syria, some to Lebanon. We built chassis for fire trucks that went to Kronenberg in Holland, not Holland, Michigan, but in the Netherlands. And it was my job to help Stanley doing some of the research on some of the projects that we were asked to do. We were a small company, big time people already had their export divisions, but we were the ones and twos. And a lot of what we did was send trucks to Holland. And my job, believe it or not, at the time was to drive these fairly large vehicles that had no body on them, just a cab and chassis, to the Dundalk Pier in Baltimore to go on a boat to Holland. And one of the stories I remember is coming into Baltimore. This truck had air brakes on it, by the way. Coming into Baltimore on a rainy afternoon, and I stopped at a 76 truck stop, and I asked the gentleman there, what's the quickest way to get to the Dundalk Pier? And I said, I was told to go around on the bypass. He said, no. I'll tell you how to go. Go right downtown. Well, not familiar with Baltimore. I had this truck that was trying to catch up with me. I ended up in a residential area, and there's a big sign that said no trucks over 1 ton. So I thought, now what do? I can't turn around because the streets are too narrow. And I had this big truck, and every time I came to a stop sign, because it was raining, I'd slide through the stop sign because of the air brakes. On my way, a gentleman who worked at the pier saw that I was really confused, and he pulled up alongside me in a little Volkswagen. He says, I think you're probably headed for the pier. Because I said, yeah, I am. He said, well, follow me. So I followed him through Baltimore in this little Volkswagen bus. I was sitting high in this truck, and he led me to the pier. And I never would have found it had he not led me there. But coming back, I said, well, let me pay you for taking me to the pier because I stayed at the Holiday Inn. He said, no, that's all right. I worked there. I said, well, let me buy you dinner. This was on Stan, okay? So we went to a crab shack, believe it or not, and they had Baltimore soft-shelled crabs, which I'd never had before. You go to this crab shack, and there's a picnic tables with butcher paper on it, and they come in with buckets of crabs, and they dump them on the butcher paper. And here's this gentleman, I don't even know his name, and here I am eating with him, and they're put these crabs out there, and he takes the inside and eats the inside of it. That about ended it for me. But I did eat parts of it, and I said, well, let me pay for dinner. Big shot, credit card, business expense. So I put it on Stan's bill. And then I thought about that coming home. I said, I might lose my job over this because I'm not sure Stanley is going to appreciate the fact that I charge a dinner for 2 of us in Baltimore. 1 was been all right, but 2 probably wouldn't have made it. But I told him the whole story, and he said, well, that's fine. I'll pay it. So I didn't lose my job. But that was an experience. Did anybody ever want to make an offer on 10,000 tires for Russian Army Jeeps. That was one of the projects that he gave to me, and I thought, well, where are we going with this? Who's going to make tires for an Army Jeep in Russia that we were about ready to go to war with? And so I called Goodyear, and they said, oh, we already got the order. I said, well, good, because I didn't want to have to deal with it anymore. And then the second big item was retrofit engines for Russian Army tanks. And I said, really? We're going to do this? We're going to supply tank engines to our enemies' tanks so they can come and shoot us? So, yeah, he said that we got a request to, I don't know whether 10 or 15 of these Army tank engines. So I called Angel Corporation Muskegon, big supplier of U.S. Army engines at the time. He said, oh yeah, hey, we do that all the time. I said, we sell them from the transmission forward. To the Army in Russia? And he said, yeah. He said, I said, wow, talk about the American enterprise. If you can make a buck selling stuff to the Russians, I guess everything goes. So those are the two stories I had from Skokie that I remember. But more importantly, I remember the snowmobile trips that we had. I think we did 6 trips to the Upper Peninsula, 1 trip into Canada at the Laurentian Lodge with 6 of us. And then in 1983, we went to Yellowstone, 6 of us. And we snowmobiled through the areas in Yellowstone. We went to Yellowstone National Park on snowmobiles. We had a great time. If you haven't seen Yellowstone in the winter, you really haven't seen Yellowstone, in my opinion. It's a beautiful spot. The Hayden Valley in Yellowstone, no tracks, absolutely gorgeous. And we talked to a park ranger there. And I said, so this is a big controversy now about snowmobiles in the park, pollution, making tracks. And I said, is this going to, because there was a big movement on at the time to eliminate snowmobiles. And he said, actually, no. He said, I think the snowmobiles are better here than cross-country skiers and snowshoers. And he said, really? He said, yeah. He said, they go out and destroy nature by taking tracks that aren't, they go out in the valleys, they go out and chase these animals out of their habitat in the wintertime. He said, the snowmobilers have to stay on the road. So he said, I'd rather see the snowmobilers there than cross-country skiers. And I thought, wow, I like this guy. Even though he did wear a green uniform and had a badge and a coat on, carried a gun, I said, I really like this guy. So in 1996 or 2006, Stan arranged a trip for the boys with Rodney and Peter and Scott and myself. I guess I was considered one of his boys. We went back to Yellowstone, and we stayed in West Yellowstone Holiday Inn, and we had a tour package. And Stanley, I'll tell you, to this day, he was so organized that every week we'd get a flyer about what we were going to do, where we were going to eat, and how we were going to eat, and what we were going to eat, and what kind of snowmobiles we were going to ride. And every time I went to the post office, I'd get this Stanley Brubaker letter, and I thought, oh, geez. But that's how Stanley was. He was very organized, he was very methodic, and he loved to travel. And the stories that I hear about Joe and Stan going across the country, both east and west, with their motorhome, he loved Joe almost to a fault, but they so much enjoyed their travels together when they went. And after Joe passed in '16, Stan says, you want to go on a trip? I turned to Pam and I said, Stanley wants me to go to the Upper Peninsula for a week in his motorhome. And we did. Pam unfortunately couldn't go, but we retraced the trails that Joe and Stan went on all the way to the Porcupine Mountains. And we stopped at every rest stop that he and Joe stopped at. We ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches where Joe and Stan ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It was a nostalgic trip for him to go back to be able to share it with somebody after Joe passed. And then, I'll make this shorter, what year did your son graduate from Vanderbilt? 18? 17? I was at Stan's house. Scott called and they said, Cole's graduating with a PhD in engineering from Vanderbilt University. I'd really like you to be there. And he said, I'll even buy your airplane ticket. And Stan said, I don't fly. And he said, well, I'll come pick you up. And he said, no, it's too far for you to go. So I'm standing there. I said, Stanley, we're going. He looked at me. He says, okay. So we left. And we did his reminiscent tour through Detroit where he met Joe, where the kids were born, where automotive inventory was. We went to Greenfield Village so we could ride in the Model A Ford. And we ended up in Perrysburg, Ohio that night. And that's kind of where we started. And then he said, well, we'll go to eat. And Stanley, God love him, his dad was president of AAA of Michigan. So do you think he could use a GPS? No, they're all paper maps. And some of the newest ones are 1942. So we get into Perrysburg, and we're going to find this restaurant that he was sure he could find, but all the street names were changed. And we got lost and came back to the hotel, and I said, Stan, we got to write a book. It's going to be called Lost in Perrysburg. But we finally made it. We went to Cole's graduation. It was a great time. I met Scott's wife, I think, maybe for the second time. And we just had a wonderful time together. And I remember that as a time that Stanley really enjoyed. If you can see some pictures of Stanley and Cole at that graduation, it was very moving. I enjoyed it as much as Stanley did. And then 2 years ago, 21, Stan called me up and he says, you want to go to Denver? I want to see Scott and Melinda and Cole and Quinn. Thank you. And Quinn was living at home. So I said, yeah, I guess so. I have to check with my wife. And so we started on our trip by way of Duluth. No expressways, all 2-lane roads. Took us 3 days to get there. Scott can drive it in a day and a half. Took us 3 days.
I think it took you 5, John.
Maybe 2 days?
Maybe 5.
5 days, whatever. I never saw so many cows in my life. Going through North Dakota, South Dakota, into Wyoming. And of course, Stan's driving, and every time he comes, I said, Stanley, you're going, there's a curve up here. You slam on the brakes. So when we get to Denver, shortly after we get there, the brakes are just squealing. And Scott says, I think we need to go to the Ford dealer and see if we can get the brakes changed out in your car. I said, good idea, because I don't think we're going to make it home if we don't get the brakes changed. So Scott took his dad, took the car down, and got brakes put on the car. We were there 2 days. It took us 3 days to get back home by roads that I had never heard of. But Stanley had them outlined on his map in yellow marker on which roads we were going to take. And that's my trip to Denver. Actually, to Littleton, Colorado. But one of the highlights for me was going to the school at Columbine where those children were shot. And they have a great memorial, and it was really moving for me to walk through that memorial with Stanley and see that the parents had written statements about each of the 12 kids that were shot in that event. But that still is in my heart to see those young kids that had a whole life ahead of them that were wiped out in that moment. But some people, oh, that was pretty morbid to go to that memorial, but it really meant a lot to me, and it meant a lot to your dad. So, those are my stories about Stanley. except for the parade. And somebody told me
Yeah,
that the parade now belongs to me.
It's in the documents.
And I'm not sure that I signed up for that. And I think my wife Pam might have something to say about that. And you know what? At this point, I'm going to listen to her. But if I'm in Glen Haven doing the parade next summer, she's been kind enough to let me do it. So those are my remarks about Stanley. I hope you can glean something. I know you all have personal stories, but that's what I remember about Stan Brubaker. So with that, I'm going to read Psalm 40. Why do I keep turning to this song sheet? I can't sing. I did have this organized at one point. It's hard to get through all these marching orders. Thank you, Stanley. So, Psalm 40, Old Testament, first 3 verses. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire, and set my feet on a rock. He gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Stanley was he was a good believer. He understood where God was, who God was, and where he was going to go. And for some of you, that's maybe hard to believe, but on our many trips, we talked about Scripture. We talked about Jesus Christ, and we talked about someday he is going to be reunited with Joe, and hoping that we can all be together again. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Blake and Shelley to sing the second song. That hymn is What a Glorious Day That Will Be.
Heartaches alone. No more clouds in the sky, no more tears in the eyes. All is peace forevermore on that golden happy shore. What a great, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be when my Jesus I shall see. When I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace. When he takes me by my hand, leads me through the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. There'll be no sorrow there, no more burdens to bear, no more sickness, no pain, no more parting over there. And forever I will be with the one who died for me. What a day, glorious day that will be. my Jesus I can see, and I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace. When he takes me by my hand, he leads me through the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be, when my Jesus I can see, and I'll look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace. When he takes me by my hand, he leads me through his promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day, glorious day that will be. Hallelujah.
Amen. Thank you, Shelley. Thanks, Blake. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, just really quickly.
This is Christy Brubaker, by the way.
I just want to tell you all that you were very important to my dad in one way or another. I'm sure he knew you all. He had stories about you all that we all heard many times. And I'm just really grateful that you're here. He would be very grateful to see you all. I think the most precious thing my dad and mom ever gave all of us, and I'm going to speak for them as well, was the opportunity to live up here and to live on the beach and explore everything around here. So that's the best memory that holds so many more that I could ever hope for, and I'm just really grateful. So thank you all very much for being a part of his life in one way or another.
Thanks,
And
Christy.
you too.
Thank you.
Happy 4th.
You guys have got to help me. Right, Rod? Can't do this by myself. Thanks, Christy. I'd like us to have a moment of silence and a prayer. We're going to sing or say the Lord's Prayer. So if you'll bow your heads. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. I wish somebody would take this 10-page document from me, because I keep stumbling through it. But it's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. Well, I've got that. I'm just looking for what I need to read. I may call on my friend Jerry Pearson, because I can't find what he told me. Well, we should end with is a benediction. Come on, Jerry.
Yeah? Do you have something with the Army? Was that?
Yeah, they're coming, I think.
Oh, okay. We're waiting.
Yeah. No, it's 2 Peter 3. You should have it memorized, because we just talked about it in our Bible study.
Okay, well, this is what we ended our time at the park every Sunday. As John said, Stan really enjoyed the park service. And for all that attended, attended, he always enjoyed interacting with folks. Actually, my daughter-in-law started coming with my son, and she remembered exactly who Stan was when I talked to her when she stopped by my office here in Traverse City. And what we would do is we had the same benediction, and so that's what I suggested John use. And it's from 2 Peter, chapter 3, verse 18. And Peter said, go out and grow in the grace and in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. To him be glory forevermore. And we would say what?
Amen.
Amen.
So that concludes my portion. I don't know where the Army is. It's, hurry up and wait, maybe? I don't know. Are they here?
Oh, here we go, John.
Boy, that's good timing. Are they?
President of the United States, the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol for appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service.
I just did that.
Okay.
So military was close.
Okay. Thanks everybody for coming and being here on this beautiful sunny day. Make sure that you drive safe wherever you're going. Again, thanks for being here to show your support. And thanks to our musicians and to the United States Army as well. So just exit safely. There's 2 restrooms here, one on the main level and one upstairs. And if you need anything, come find me or anyone with a name tag. Thank you.